Welcome, Reanimated fans, to this week's episode. I'm AJ Conrad, coming to you from Brooklyn. Brooklyn, not a D at the end. What's going on?
Brookland.
Brookland. I mean, it's kind of is Brooklyn. And the dulcet tones you just heard were Stuart Tiffin, my intrepid co-host, coming to you from the Bay Area, ish.
Ish.
And also joining us today is our amazing guest star, Kyle Diaz. Hi, Kyle.
Coming to you from Seattle, where, as far as I can tell, there are no military assault vehicles roaming the streets, but it's early in the day. Who knows? They could be out later today.
It's
Um,
fair.
we are referencing episode 3, season 2 of The Last of Us. And Kyle, were they actually filming there? I feel like that looked very CG, but you
They
know,
filmed in Vancouver, I saw. But
That would
based,
make sense. Usually, when you see Seattle in films, it's actually Vancouver. But I've got a few little beefs with their knowledge of Seattle geography that we'll get into. But overall, it was very fun to see, kind of so much of Seattle portrayed in CG or not in the episode.
yeah, it
I
doesn't
mean,
feel like a city you get to see post-apocalyptically very often.
No, I would say not.
and I enjoyed seeing Boston in the first season just because I
Yeah,
had so much time
it
there.
didn't
Not that
look
I
anything like
enjoyed,
Boston. I mean,
it just was kind of fun again, but I also had some nits about their geography and where they
oh,
were going
yeah.
for a lot,
We all remember 10 miles outside of Boston being in the middle of the Canadian Alps. Alps?
wherever it was.
Rockies. Yeah.
But anyway, but before we get to the main attraction of the show and the review, we have a couple of little news items. So apparently there's been like some promo happening with some of the actors and other people from the Dead City spinoff of The Walking Dead. So there's apparently been some zombies showing walkers showing up at random things. And I will tell you, I did see a few of these walking around, and I at first did a double take and crossed the street
Uh,
because I didn't.
you, the consummate zombie professional?
Well, I was like, something's not right down there.
Honestly, that just speaks to your survivability. Well played.
Yeah, something's not right down there. And so I just walked across the street. And then a little later, I was like, oh, this looks like it's a zombie walk or something like that. I didn't realize it was actually part of a full ad campaign that they had them popping up at like the Brooklyn Marathon. And where I saw it was near Radio City Music Hall. So I was just like, yeah, just, I'm gonna keep my distance. And, that could be the start of a zombie movie where you think it's a gimmick and it turns out not to be.
That is a premise that
Have
we've
to
seen.
you have to stay vigilant,
Yeah.
friends.
So how did they look? Were they like in character when you saw them or were like
Oh
drinking
yeah,
a latte or something?
this person was definitely, the reason why it really stood out is that they were doing the whole drag and like they were into it. They were really into it.
The
Um,
drag like dragging their legs or they were dressed
Dragging
up?
their legs and then like kind of weaving, doing that sort of off-kilter walk thing and
Mm.
just, I was just like, I'm just
And
gonna avoid.
but did they have security like or like a flock of PAs around them to make sure nobody killed them?
There was like a film camera thing, which is why I was like, oh wait, this must be some promo thing.
Okay.
But they were far enough away from them when I saw them that I didn't immediately realize that that's what it was. Like, come on, this is what you do when you're in New York. You're like, I see a threat and or a potential thing, and I'm just gonna avoid it. So, or the other part is just you don't notice it at all and completely ignore it, and thus are kept safe by your ignorance.
Right. Sounds
Uh,
like how the strain got started.
yep.
Well, cool. I'm glad you got to witness some of the zombies. It looks like they all even went up to the top of the Empire State Building, and Scott Gimple and Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Lauren Cohan were all there too.
All right,
Unfortunately, I did not see any of them,
Well,
but
I have two quick things on this. One is, as a parent of small children, I would not have relished the conversations we would have if we had encountered zombies just strolling around in public. So I hope that New York City school children probably are a little bit more hardened to weird shit in public than mine are. So I hope they, just
I
cruise
will
right past
say
this.
kids are pretty tough in the like because this kind of thing happens all the time where you have these kinds of campaigns and things like that. So I would see them be more excited about it. You know, you and Kyle.
And then my second thing is just kind of a question about the Walking Deadiverse because I stopped watching The Walking Dead the moment that baseball bat made contact with Glenn. Like that was my immediate off ramp. And I think a lot of people did. And were they just like, oh, this guy's supposed to be a villain, but damn, Jeffrey Dean Morgan just has too much charisma. We got to keep this guy in the show. Like, well, how is this guy now the star of another show? It's probably a long and winding road, but
Yeah.
does this happen in the comics, or were they just like, man, we can't let
No.
this guy go because
The
he's just
Um,
too charismatic, and we got to find a way to redeem him
yeah,
somehow.
I think
yeah,
it's exactly what you just said.
the
Okay.
short answer is he's an anti-hero too. He's not like he hasn't come around to be like the guy. Well, you do cheer for him because you can cheer for an anti-hero, but it's about his, his sine wave of his relationship with good and evil.
Okay. Okay. All right.
And
That makes sense because he's
it's
very
also
charismatic.
they also definitely walked the line where, you know, this is the path that he took, and he's got a lot of parallels with Rick and with other characters where you're like, oh, but this is the path he chose to walk, and they play around a lot with that. But I definitely think there's ways that they really um they definitely soften his character, I think, a lot more in these shows.
Hmm.
And make it a little bit more like, oh, maybe he's a good guy, and then then he'll do something else. But anyway, yeah. So next up in the news front,
Yeah, next up in the news is an announcement of a new show coming out this summer, I believe in June from Sci-Fi. HA, I'll pause to let you say it the way you like to say it.
Sifi.
There you go. And this is going to be a show called Revival, starring Melanie Scrofano. Melanie Scrofano, as fans of Wyatt Winona Earp might know, used to be a vampire hunter, and now she is a sheriff's deputy or a cop. I don't remember where this was set, but there's a lot of remnants DNA in this show. I think it was called Remnants, or no, The Revenants, that French show about people. So one day people just start coming back from the dead, and they're not necessarily zombies, but maybe some of them are in this show. So it's I don't know. It looks interesting. Definitely worth a look.
Oh my gosh, I did totally watch Winona Earp. I just looked up some interview. I must have just blocked this out. How did
It's sci-fi. This is how you do things.
Ah, yeah. So this was
Stevie.
one of the shows that, so when I do, when I row on my rowing machine, there's specific shows that I'll watch, and this was one of them. So maybe it felt like it was in a different universe.
She doesn't really look the same, I will say.
She definitely doesn't, and maybe that's, yeah. But yeah, I'm kind of excited for this. Did you watch the trailer?
Yeah, yeah. It's a decent trailer. Yeah, it's got a
Question.
little bit of that like police investigator in a not quite zombie apocalypse plotline.
It's got a little X-Files vibe,
Hmm.
but I- I'm I'm curious about the mythology behind this, and they touch upon it a little bit. So I really want to see what the mechanism is and how it's not quite the traditional zombie thing, but
No.
I'm very curious about this. And I really love a good serial detective show. So I'm gonna do it. How about you, Kyle? Did you check it out?
I didn't. I have not seen Winona Earp, and I'm not really very familiar with this actress, and I did not have no chance to watch the trailer, so I should have not spoken.
You
So
didn't
0 for
do your
3.
homework? You didn't do your homework, Kyle, like we do 5 minutes before we start this.
No, I didn't see it in time.
AJ, you can't say that on the air.
I don't always.
Golly.
Mm.
I will say Melanie Scrofano was in a movie called Ready or Not in 2019 that I really, really enjoy. So I, I remember her from that film, and she and everybody else did a great job.
Hmm. Synopsis?
Uh, A new bride goes to meet her new husband's family, who turn out to be a bunch of rich psychopaths who have a very bloody game that they play with new members of the family.
Jesus. Okay, a little bit like a little
Like
bit Get Out.
normal relations,
Yeah,
right?
it has probably one of the most daring choices at the end of the film that I've ever seen in a film, where you're just like, wow, I cannot believe they actually followed through with that. It's really, really fun. It's horror and it's like kind of like slasher horror, but it's also fun. It's not really played for like
Hmm.
for too seriously. Very, very fun movie.
Awesome. And then finally, final piece of news for this week is something I'm kind of excited about, but it hasn't even started filming yet. Just announced on Deadline, and then there's an article in Bloody Disgusting, film called Rapture, which will be set in the late Dark Ages in England, starring Will Poulter, Kit Connor, Manu Rios. Two of those guys are from Warfare, which is still in theaters. And it's an interesting premise. It's going to be about an abbey in the 14th century, the year 1348, which everybody, of course, remembers is when the Black Death kind of kicked off. So they're taking a historical fiction approach to it, which I do appreciate. And actually, I think it's interesting that it's going to be set in a monastery because this is about 100 years before Henry VIII started the Reformation and took over all the monasteries. And before he did that, monasteries basically were the biggest landlords in the UK or in England and were extremely influential. So I think there's an opportunity here for these actors in this story to talk about some cool stuff that happened in England, but then also didn't happen because of zombies.
I will admit that when I first opened up this article, I was like, that does not look medieval.
No, yeah, that
The
photo
photo
is
that they used was just
that guy's
not.
wearing chinos.
I was like, what kind of medieval world are they building here? Anyway, but no, it looks really cool. I'm excited to hear about this. I'll be more excited once it actually starts getting into production.
Yeah.
But the premise of it looks pretty cool, so I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and like a good abbey can also be kind of like a little fortress. So I
Mhm.
think there's there's potential for cool storytelling.
Well, and remember, there's always an undercroft of the Abbey, so you got a lot of opportunity there.
Catacombs.
Yeah.
And that's the end of news, though, unless anybody else has anything additional to bring up.
Yeah.
All right, then we shall move on to the path.
Yes.
But before we do, so we did get an email I wanted to talk um, about how and I think the listener who wrote in is not alone in these opinions about um, having issue with the way that the cast was cast. Basically, it's saying that Bella Ramsey is a miscast Ellie, um, and that Caitlin Dever might not really reflect what their imagination was, or not what the video game portrayal of Abby is either. And I don't think that either of those things are 100% false. So I'm just going to go on my take on this real quick, and then I want to hear from you guys too. Um, and I listening to the official podcast, you can hear Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin talk about the story and the choices they've made. And listening to Neil, who basically what was co-writer at least of the video game, he talks about in this version. He used that phrase in one of his responses on the podcast. In this version of the story, because it is a different version. It is a different approach entirely to the story of The Last of Us, the second game. And I think that that is kind of the thesis for my response to this, which is that uh, as a never gonna publish author, probably I'm like working on my zombie novel for the last 10 years, and by God, I'll do it until the day I die. I'm trying to tell a story, and what my hope would be if I ever wrote a successful novel, and when I read a good novel, it's not, it's basically to be in the shoes of the reader and just to kind of take the story in that is being told to me. And it's not really so much to pass judgment on it, I guess, uh, because that's the role of the storyteller to me. And so while I might also agree, like, oh yeah, would Katie O'Brien have been a much better Abby because she's built like a brick shit house and can act too? yeah, that would have been my personal choice if I was casting this show, but then again, I wasn't. So I guess that's kind of where I land is just in order to keep a positive uh approach and try and like take in the story as in the intent of which it has been being told to me. I do take that more passive sort of approach. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my long-winded response. I don't know how you guys feel.
I mean, I do like so I totally understand and I felt like this with some of the Walking Dead stuff and Game of Thrones and I don't really have as much of a dog in this fight because I obviously haven't played the games. I mean, I know of them and I've you know, gotten some kind of like download from you, Stuart, and from other people, and obviously I've read the different things as they talk about some of the issues. But just in terms of like having like a creative work being made into another type of medium like it's a little bit like what we were just talking about Negan, the character of Negan, and some of the decisions that were made with that character in order to explore other themes and other themes. And I do think because Druckmann is involved, I'll give him whatever creative vision he wants to do with this. And I do think it results in some really cool things and interesting dynamics and relationships and themes. But I also do understand the idea that you have this character that maybe you really thought was cool and beloved. And so I do think that they're trying to walk that line and there's certain things that they are absolutely doing to, hey, this is the cool thing we're going to show in this because it was in the game and it's meaningful to a lot of fans. But I thought it is a different story. And I thought that so much that I really was convinced that they weren't going uh, to kill off Joel when they did, or maybe they would do it in a different way, only because he was such an interesting character to play out some of these dynamics and relationships and themes with Ellie. And I actually find Bella Ramsey to be a really interesting actor, and I think that it would be really easy, not easy, easy to go overboard with the anger and it's much more nuanced and you can almost see the different things playing out in how her character is evolving. And I honestly like the dynamic between her and Pedro Pascal was it felt so real that I really appreciate that. Um and I actually, and I do love Caitlin Dever. Is it Dever or Dever? I've heard two
Well, I don't know.
we don't know. Anyway, but I'm gonna just take the performance at face, and I'm not as worried about some of those other things. I mean, I do know that they've changed some of the things that happened with Dina, and I actually kind of like the direction that it's going. But I also understand when there's like these characters you've become like or you're really interested in and you see them play out and you kind of want to see some of the same things play out on the screen and you want to see them come to life. So I totally get that part too. But ultimately, I'm really enjoying the storytelling of this show and I'm really enjoying the acting and the way it's unfolding. But I'm curious to hear what Kyle thinks because you've played the game too, Kyle, or am I the only non-player here?
I played the first game, but not the second.
Okay.
So is you know, so the main points of the email are basically number one, Ellie's miscast. Bella Ramsey's not the Ellie that this person and many others had pictured in their heads. Number two, Caitlin Dever would make a better Ellie. They fits more with what the images of Ellie in people's minds. And number three, other changes that they've made from the game, Tommy's involvement in Joel's death, some of the other choices they've made. Caitlin Dever playing Abby, who's not, this super strong woman, you know, are taking away from their experience of the show. Every adaptation involves choices and variations from the original. And I try, and I don't always succeed, but I try to kind of divorce myself from my feelings around the initial, source of media. Otherwise, you're just always gonna prefer usually the thing that you saw first. If you read the book first, if you played the game first, you're probably going to prefer those to the movie or the TV show. So it's hard, but I try to kind of take each piece of media for what it is and not, you know, constantly try to refer back to where it came from. And in this case, I'm actually maybe a little happy that I haven't played The Last of Us Part 2 because it seems like maybe it's because that game's more recent in people's memories because it just came out a few years ago. But for whatever reason, it seems like a lot of folks are having a harder time, accepting the choices that Druckmann and Mason and the rest are making. For the specifics of the Ramsey Deaver casting, there's a few things here that I think are odd. One is that the age of Caitlin Deaver's age does not match Ellie's age, especially in season one. So Caitlin Deaver is, I think, 8 years older than Bella Ramsey. Bella Ramsey in season one was a 19-year-old or an 18-year-old playing a 14-year-old. Deaver would have been a 24-year-old playing a 14-year-old. And then now in season two, Ramsey is a 21-year-old playing a 19-year-old, and Deaver is, I think, a 28 or 29-year-old. So I, for for just that reason alone, I don't think Deaver would have worked well for season one. I think it would have been like, those movies from the 90s where you have like a 27-year-old in high school kind of thing. So I find this particular gripe a little bit weird, and I don't remember. Maybe the discourse was there and I wasn't aware of it, but in season one, I don't remember so much pushback over Ramsey's casting. I don't remember people saying, "Oh, this person doesn't fit my image of Ellie." I remember people being quite pleased with their casting and, felt like they're really fitting the role. So I think this is more of a season two thing. And here's where I'm going to enlarge it from the writer of this email, who does not come off this way. But many people who make this point online do come off this way. Caitlin Deaver is a lot more of a stereotypically attractive actress than Bella Ramsey is. And I feel from many people online, not from this letter writer, but from many people online, I feel a sense of like, why are they making me watch this person that I don't find attractive for so long? Like, why didn't they cast a hotter person in this role that I have to pay so much attention to? Is the kind of entitlement that I feel like I'm seeing in a lot of like YouTube, comment sections and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I just kind of dismiss that outright. I think that's just uh, lazy thinking and kind of um, prejudice and not very open-mindedness about the kind of media you consume.
I
So,
I fully agree with that, Kyle. I think it's like you said, it's not in this email that we got, um, but it is 100% a sentiment that you're seeing online.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
sorry.
Yeah.
so and so it makes it hard for me to really engage with the casting what ifs and questions here because I don't think those questions are being asked by everyone in good faith.
Yeah.
Okay.
AJ, any follow-ups?
No, I mean, I think we had seen a few of those comments in season one, but not to the level that we saw after the premiere of episode one of season two. So, I agree with your take on it, Kyle, and I don't know, I just really love good acting, and I am very much invested, and we'll talk about this episode as it plays out in the storylines. But I actually really enjoyed the what trend this story is taking as it follows Ellie and Gina along, and now Dina, and there's sort of become this focus. But there's a lot of things that I liked about this episode. There's other things I'm like about, but I think we sound like we're ready to get into
Oh,
it.
I just wanted to say one more thing.
Oh, go ahead.
To the Kyle, you're right about the age difference and how Caitlin Deaver would not have worked. And she actually did age out of the role because she was originally considered for the film adaptation, which
Hmm.
was years before Craig Mazin got involved too. So that was why her name was, being thrown around a lot because she actually was in contention for it for some period of time and then aged out. And that's really all I had to say about that. But thank you both for your well thought out words on this. I should have written mine down because nobody votes for people who can't speak
Nice.
clearly. Not that I'm angry. Yeah, so yeah, if you guys are ready, we can dig into The Path, directed by Peter Hoare, name which is familiar because he did direct episode 3 of season 1, which was the Bill and Frank episode. This that episode I think stands out in season 1 because it is the farthest from the established story of the first game. This episode similarly is quite different from the game. There are elements of it that are involved, kind of, but it is quite different from the game. So I'll just say that this was so directed by Peter Hoare, written by Craig Mazin, as all of them are. This begins with it's an aftermath sort of episode, or a lot of it is an aftermath episode, right? So we begin with this shot of burning, piled up bodies outside the gates of Jackson. Flames are flickering. It's clearly very soon after the events of New Year's Day, if not the night of. And we cut to an interior shot in the restaurant where they have their town hall meetings, I think is where this is happening. And there's a woman there washing a body, and Tommy comes in and takes over. Uh, Apparently, this was a very difficult scene for Gabriel Luna. Him and Pedro Pascal were pretty close, and so he's talked about having a hard time with it emotionally. And I guess when they originally shot it, it was a lot of him talking to the body, and then they cut it all out, just left it with the words that he ends up saying, which is "Give Sarah my love," or "Give my love to Sarah." I wrote it in my notes as "Say hi to Sarah for me," which I don't think is how that came across.
Yeah.
Note taking. And then they kind of expand the shot to show you that there's actually a lot of bodies in the room. And this is one of Craig Mazin. He's brought this up a lot. He's like, look, so many times in storytelling on screen, you have a huge fight, and then for whatever reason, the plot only cares about the main character, even though there are like hundreds of dead or whatever. And so he didn't want us to take that feeling away from this because they'd introduced this huge battle of Jackson, which doesn't happen in the game either. But he didn't want to leave it at like, oh no, Joel was killed outside of town during this fight, and we don't care about anybody else. But of course, yeah, he's making the point through that shot, and then later on through dialogue. No, there was a lot of death, and there's a lot of people with feelings about how that went down. Um, it's a quiet, kind of very quiet and somber scene. Did you guys have any thoughts about it?
I did, which is I think that, the prepping or the washing of a body, especially in this time, and it's his brother that takes over this. And this is really a grieving episode. And this is for me just right now, it hit me pretty hard. So, um, that, taking that time to grieve the character, and I think if you watch the sort of little interviews they did after this, they talk specifically about that, how it's hard to do that in a game, but you're able to do that in this medium. And I thought that it was a really touching and hard scene. And, even when you see the watch face and all of that, and then when the camera pulls back and you see how many people are in that room, it just shows the weight of the tragedy that just happened
Hmm.
in Jacksonville. And so I did really like,
Jacksonville, Florida.
sorry, is it
Home of the
Jackson?
Jaguars.
Sorry, Jackson.
Jackson,
Jackson.
Wyoming. Yeah.
Jackson, Wyoming. Sorry, y'all. Um, but you see that grief and that the weight of everything, that it's not just this loss that happened with Joel dying, it's all these other people just got totally snuffed out. And so that this whole community is really grieving and in pain. And so I did really like that. I also, this whole episode was really incredibly beautiful, in terms of the lighting. Again, this whole season has felt that way, but this specifically, and a scene that happens later, was just, to me, just breathtaking. So I did like showing the relationship between the two brothers, which
Hmm.
I haven't seen actually enough of that, in my opinion. But I did like that the brother was able to say goodbye.
Yeah,
Uh,
they only really got like three or four scenes together in the
yeah.
whole course of Pedro Pascal's on the being on the show, which is a too bad. Kyle, did you have any thoughts about this quiet scene, or we can go to the hospital?
I, I thought it was great. I thought maybe nobody should be alone with dead bodies right now.
Maybe.
But but I think it's been long enough that they're pretty sure that they're actually dead and not about to turn or anything. So
Maybe they've been, slipping a knife in all their brains or something. Who knows what their policy is? But yeah, this
but
is the
I don't know. Jackson hasn't really shown that much forethought about getting ahead of the zombie problem. So um, we've talked about their preparation, or checking mechanics before. So
yeah. Well, yeah, they have people get sniffed by the dogs and stuff. At least they did in season one.
that's good.
Um, so we do cut from this very quiet, somber scene to a scene of like frantic hospital activity. There's a crying baby, which is a noise that is designed by nature to make humans go. "Ugh." So that's they threw that in there just for us. And then there's people talking, quite urgently, and we see Ellie is on a gurney and she's got a tube coming out of her torso, so they're draining fluid from her lungs, presumably. She must have broken ribs or something. It's actually very bad. Like certainly this is not something that you get to see in the game. Even though she gets her ass kicked, she has that video game power of being like, "I'm okay, let's go get him," sort of thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
but they don't make it totally. She's still got to, ramp up. So
yeah, and this is definitely by design. They want her to be down to have to stew in the, and this actually works for this episode because by the time later scenes are happening, it's 3 months later after the attack. And so it gives us lots of time and it gives the community time to try to rebuild. Definitely big changes are happening. But in the meantime, Ellie is um, having like real traumatic reactions to what just happened at the lodge, screaming at a vision she's seeing, um, and clearly has a long road back to health in front of her. Um, yeah. And then we go to the title credits after that, unless you guys had anything to say.
I kind of appreciated how messed up Ellie was.
Mhm.
You don't you kind of see her, she gets roughed up by the crew, Abby's crew, but it would have been really easy for them to just kind of be like, "Oh yeah," and then she healed and she was fine, kind of shrugged it off like many shows do. And I kind of like that they showed that no, she's actually really injured and it's a long road
Yeah.
for convalescence back to health for her. She's got like tubes in her lungs because it seems like she has a collapsed lung or something. I just thought it was a nice. The show is pretty respectful of the impact of violence on people in a way that a lot of media isn't. So I just like to see that.
Yeah.
I like that, and I also liked that it shows exactly how much damage she got from like she was not left like this was not a quick recovery. So it's not just that she is absolutely going through this grieving period, it's that physically she was just taken out. And I also think that the medical know-how and it's going to be a longer recovery regardless, like no matter what. It like she probably broke some ribs and had a collapsed lung and that all is going on. So in addition to the horrible grief she's going through, she's also in an incredibly vulnerable place, just from recovery from this kind of an injury. And I did like that, and I liked that they didn't make it like she's not just going to bounce back. And this is not just physical but mental, and so they, bring in the therapist eventually, and that has a role here too. So I really thought this was great, in that it really sets the table for how the rest of the episode unfolds.
Yeah. Uh, as we go into the title credits here, I don't know if either of you noticed that they changed slightly for this episode. Previously, it's always been at the end of the title credits, one tall cordyceps growth and one shorter one next to each other. This one, there's just the one. The show is telling us, if anybody watches the title credits anymore, which I think a lot of people just like skip, uh, Ellie is by herself.
Yeah, I noted it. I admit I was like, oh, it was
Yeah,
really upsetting.
yeah. It is. It's weird. It's weird that that could be as affecting as it was, but there she is, just one little cordyceps. And then we cut to, I'm not sure. At some point, did they say, was there a subtitle that said 3 months or 2 months later? I thought
Yes.
there was, but I couldn't find it in my second watching.
Nope, it was right there, but it was pretty quick.
It was right there. Okay, so then that's when they're already hammering in some like foundations. They're building a whole building out of wood, it looks like. Tommy is half-heartedly hitting a stake into the ground, and Jesse kind of comes over and finishes it off for him. Uh,
Was it
very
3 months or 5 months?
It's at least it's three, I think, because Jesse then in some dialogue later says to Ellie, "You're much better shape than you should be, considering you sat on
Okay.
your ass for 3 months."
Okay. Yep.
Um, yeah. So Tommy is kind of like half there. He seemed, or at least he's maybe feeling his age. And Jesse is hammering in stakes like it's no big deal. Ellie in the hospital has to talk to Gail to get released. She seems to have a lot of her spirit back. This is a very interesting scene with her and Gail.
Hmm.
Uh, Thoughts, reactions, Kyle.
We get additional context on this scene a little bit later from Gail, but I liked that they made her talk to her, and I liked that, you know, you can tell that each of them knows the other is bullshitting them in this scene, and it's kind of a fun dynamic because Gail doesn't really want to be the reason why Ellie can't leave the hospital. But at the same time, she does not believe that Ellie is healed from this trauma on any level whatsoever. So I just thought it was an interesting dynamic for them back and forth to have that kind of, I don't know, cat and mouse game that they're playing with each other in the dialogue.
Yeah.
I thought it was also very similar to the dialogue she had with Joel, and it's almost like a parallel back and forth too, but even almost in a slightly more passive aggressive way. And these two in the scene together, this was such a fantastic interaction. And so much of what is not said is even to me it's even more powerful than what they're actually saying. And so I loved that it's like this there is an acknowledgement that each of them fully understands what is actually happening. And I actually I did, I was a little worried when she has the dialogue later with Tommy that they were going to try to explain it a little bit too much, but they didn't do that, which I really liked. So
Yeah.
thought this was great.
Yeah, just the Catherine O'Hara fan club over here. I
Yeah.
honestly, they added in this actor, and she's really, really good, even though this character doesn't exist, and before this version of the story, to use Druckmann's term. I'm really glad that they've included her because, yeah, she does have a lot of work to do in this community, especially now. I do think
Are you
it's.
guys watching the studio?
I've watched one episode. It was too cringy. I'll
She
go
is
back to it.
also in the studio, and she is very good in the studio. And the studio is a show about making movies in Hollywood that somehow manages to be about 10 times more stressful than this show. I don't really know how they do it, but it is.
Yeah.
So, but she's excellent in it.
Because they make terrible decisions all the
Yeah.
time, and they always lie. At least Seth Rogen does. Um, so the thing that I thought is interesting about Gail is that she's really kind of doggedly trying to figure out what this thing is that happened between Joel and Ellie that was the source of their angst before Joel died. I think she's still quite focused on that as being like a source of trauma for Ellie. And maybe it is, and maybe she's on the right track. But I find that quite interesting that even now Joel is dead, she's still kind of trying to get at the heart of that stuff. Um, but yeah, but then she basically lets Ellie go because she's like, I'm not gonna get anywhere with this kid because she's full of it. Um, and Ellie goes home, and in front of the house is a lot of, well, now very old because it's been a few months, but flowers and letters to Joel in front of his house, of well wishers, or not well wishers, but mourners, and that's quite moving. And then she goes inside. I know that they filmed this on a set. I don't I don't love the way that they did some little. It's very nitpicky, my nit about this set, but dust doesn't speckle
Mm.
when it lands on things, and yet they must do this with like a gun. I get it, like you're not gonna painstakingly paint dust on every surface, but when they do it out of these I assume it's from like some sort of fire extinguisher. It just comes out all speckly.
Yeah.
And if you have a messy house like I do, you know what dust looks like. You don't, you know, it's on the top of all my picture frames, and it doesn't look speckly. It's like a thick, it's a whole thing. It's a layer. And then they had smoke in some of like in the scene in the closet where she's sniffing his jacket, which is a very good scene, very touching. But why is it smoky in there? Like I like some to me that just broke my immersion a little bit because they have the it's a golden hour because it always is, right? And then there's smoke wafting around in the room and there's speckly dust on things. And I was like, oh, this is taking me out of this otherwise really, impactful scene of Ellie coming to terms with physical reminders of Joel. I don't know if you guys had any issues with it. I probably shouldn't have launched with my negatives.
I thought the house looked great. I actually noted the dust though, not quite in the same with the same um anger.
I'm a dust realist. That's all.
But I also had the same thought that that looks really contrived. But I did like the idea that this is incredibly hard. And actually, it felt like a weirdly like a little bit of a callback to when she and Joel were wandering through Frank and what is it? I can't
Bill?
Bill's house. Oh, how terrible that I'm forgetting that. Um, like, but this is a house she knows. And given the director of this episode, I felt that that was a little bit deliberate, and they do have a little bit of that open window with the curtain behind her at some point. But I liked that. So in that case, she didn't know the characters, but Joel did, so it wasn't meaningful to her in the same way. That this is meaningful. So this is, again, it's almost like every item and they have it set up pretty well. It's like things that are half done and his flannel shirts and his coat and they really do a lot like with the camera scenes like they're really making this incredibly intense because they're into her like really like close up on her face and you can definitely feel the pain that she's in and she's just not willing to show that to anybody else. So we also see when she gets interrupted by Dina that she really does not want anybody else to, especially Dina probably, to see the grief that she's really feeling. And this is such a contrast to what she was just doing with Gail that it's that she really does feel like she has to mourn this alone. Um, it's she this is not somebody who's going to let other people on the inside because Joel was that person who understood this really without that conversation. So I thought this was a pretty intense and really successful scene. I actually did like all the things that they set up in the house, and it was like, oh, it was kind of hard because you just have all these little callbacks and these little things that are set up really well. Um, and of course the box with the obvious things in it. So her taking the gun and putting it that's what she takes. It's like, we see that happen show up later on
Yeah,
in
I'm wondering, do you think she understands the significance of the watch? Is that something that she and Joel have, do you feel
she
like
knows
they've
it's
talked
his, I
about?
think. She
But
knows it's his, but she's
does
ignoring
she
it.
know that it was his last thing that he had of his daughter in a way?
Oh, I don't know that. I'm surprised that it isn't in this very extensive Wikipedia article about this episode. So maybe it is and I missed that.
Might
But
be. But that,
that's
that was what Sarah was out doing the day of the
right.
apocalypse was getting that watch repaired.
Yep. Um And that's why I was like, oh, she took the gun and not the watch. So I don't, maybe she did take the watch, but it felt like she just took the
And
gun.
I think she left the watch too. That's my recollection. Kyle, any thoughts about this until Dina arrives?
Just that it's really good crying from Bella Ramsey. Like
Really good
it's
crying.
like there's like voluminous tears. It's not just a little sniffles. I like, it's good when you see an actor really throw themselves into their crying scenes.
I mean, you can get eye drops for that too. I think that's one of those tricks of the trade is that they'll menthol or something your eyeballs. Um, Apparently in the behind the scenes, the director of photography who was operating the camera said that she was also crying during these scenes. So I think it was just like crying in front of the camera, behind the camera. It was a very tearful scene to shoot in that hallway, in that closet.
I think it's good to remember, when you hear things like the actor for Tommy saying how hard it was to shoot that scene and stuff. I think it's important to remember that essentially everyone involved in a show like this, but especially the actors, are way more dramatic than your normal person walking around doing their normal job.
Yeah.
Like those kinds of people who feel things very deeply and are able to access these deep wells of emotion go into acting. So I think about this a lot when you hear about like, crazy behavior or weird things that actors say or stuff like that. And I'm just kind of like, they're all just theater kids at heart, and that's why they're where they are. And so it it sometimes I roll my eyes a little bit and then I have to remember like, oh, they're there because they feel things this way.
Yeah. It must be
Or
I
maybe,
would have a hard
maybe,
time with
I
that.
don't know, other humans maybe feel things really deeply, Kai.
Maybe so. Maybe I'm the weird one.
Oh no. This just in. Kyle, unemotional. Bella Ramsey apparently was thinking of happy memories with Pedro Pascal, which is how she got her tears to show up on
Oh
set.
no.
Hey, you know what? Whatever gets the job done, right? Okay. So then Dina shows up, and like you've already said, HA, she quickly wipes away the tears, resets back to as neutral as she can, um, because God forbid anybody knows that she's upset about Joel's death. And then they go downstairs and have their discussion with cookies. This is yeah, Dina is clearly a planner. I mean, that becomes even more clear as this episode goes on, but she's had months to think about this conversation, and she shows up as equipped as she can in a way. And the timing of her showing up as soon as Ellie is released from hospital, I think is you can't discount that either. So it's quite interesting how this conversation goes. How did you guys feel about it, HA?
I liked it, and I also liked how they know each other well enough. Like Dina knew exactly what this reaction was going to be, which is why she brought the cookies. I also enjoy the plot point of the cookies where they're both having this conversation and it's pretty intense. But both of them, if they take a bite of the cookie, clearly it's like really good cookies, and I was like, I kind of want a cookie now.
Ugh, oatmeal
But
though, gross.
eh, oatmeal has its place and
I
it's
think
My
fine.
that's the
favorite.
only
That's my
cookie.
favorite one.
I think that's the only one in the zombie apocalypse because like flour is how this whole thing started.
Oatmeal scotchies are so good. Um, anyway, this interaction between them, I really liked it because it's also that Dina's been keeping this from her for months now, and so she knows that this is going to be. I think she was expecting her to blow up actually a little bit more, and then Ellie. After she hears a little bit more, and also after she hears that Dina has not shared this with anybody else, and that actually is a big deal, as we know and we hear later from Tommy. But she knows an enormous amount about this group. She knows names, she knows where they're going, and once Ellie hears a little bit more of it, she definitely just switches into okay, how are we gonna take care of them mode. And so I really liked this. And again, this is like this building of relationships between these two characters, the relationship as a driving force. Because the other part is that Ellie is totally alone now. She's not like, she has other people kind of looking out for her. She's got Jesse, she's got Tommy. But she's the closest with Dina, and Dina is actually weirdly, even though Tommy's his brother, Dina's more of a closer link to Joel because they also had a pretty tight relationship. So she also knows that Dina is perhaps aligned with what she wants to do. And Dina was also in the room and part of what happened in those last moments, even though, she gets knocked out, but um she understands probably more than anybody how Ellie is feeling because of the violence and how horrible it was the way Joel dies. So I thought that this was a great scene.
Agreed. I started to wonder about the psychological effects of all of this on Dina as well. I bet she's had a few sessions with Gail. She was also very close to Joel, as she mentions here. So it's just nice to see how thoughtful and empathetic she is to Ellie's position, but also kind of calculating about revealing this information that she knows where these folks are and where they came from. Because, like, like we see, she knows exactly what Ellie's going to do with it.
I'm really trying not to talk about what happens in the game because this is quite different, but it doesn't mean that what the action, the events of the game aren't also going to happen in this show. So I'm not going to talk about the ways that this is different. I'm only just going to say this is quite different. Actually, what I think I can say is that Ellie and Dina have this conversation. This whole scene is basically kind of happening in the game too. The walking through the house and the smelling of things and the seeing the tokens and Dina arriving. And I think it's basically that night the girls leave town.
Hmm.
And they do it sort of with the tacit approval of Maria, who intercepts them at the stable as they're stealing horses. And she's like, well, or it's something along those lines where she basically is like, look, you're gonna go, so here, take this kind of thing. But obviously that, that cuts out most of this the rest of this episode if you take it from there. But then again, it's a video game and you can't just kind of sit around and think about feelings for as long as you can in a TV show. Um, but so they take their issue here to Tommy, and Tommy is actively doing community work, farm work, and he has some pretty insightful things to say about how Joel would have reacted in the same situation that kind of shut Ellie up for a minute, but I don't think for good. And also is like, well, this is going to have to go to the whole council, and the whole town's going to have to talk about this. So it's kind of like the bureaucratic response to this very impassioned scenario is quite interesting to me too.
I also liked that when she's like, "Oh, you're on the council now," and she acts all nonchalant and then tries to tries to get his take, and
That's
he's
for with Jesse, right?
oh, sorry, with Jesse, not with Tommy, but like um I don't know. It's interesting to watch Ellie's interactions with the different people that she now has left, and um she's not she totally understands that she's got to moderate what she's doing, but sometimes she just can't help herself. And so I guess in that way she's a little bit like Joel or a lot like Joel. So,
Jesse gives her that, he does kind of talk down to her, but he's also definitely there training her, trying to make her better. But so the advice he gives her to write down her speech, I think is like right on. Yeah, of course she needs to hear that, and she does actually go through with it. But before we even get to that scene with Jesse, we do have a scene with a new group of people all together, and it's based on the signpost we see. It's near Seattle. Um, Kyle, what were your thoughts on this scene with the people in the brown
I thought it was interesting that I liked that they introduced some kind of uh, off the wall elements without really explaining them and going into them. I mean, there's obviously some sort of mythology and like cult kind of
mm.
thing going on here. They have these odd markings on their faces, all that kind of stuff. They're dressed. I was their clothes. I did have a moment of being like, how did you guys all find these matching, like, robes or what? I don't even know exactly what you would call them, but they're not really fatigues, I guess. It seemed like it would be difficult to cobble together that many that all matched like that, but it made for kind of a spooky look to them. Um, I will say their alert method of whistling in an extremely loud and distinctive manner in a silent forest maybe is not the best for hiding. 'Cause it's like they all hide in the forest, but their signal is this like extremely loud whistle that cuts through everything.
Kyle, I wrote that exact note. I said, "What is this whistling thing? Seems like a bad idea."
Yeah. So, uh, not a surprise that what happens to them as we see later in the episode. But I don't know. They were a little spooky and but also a little bit human because you can see him kind of mentoring this young girl, and it was interesting. It's expanding the lens of the world beyond what we've seen so far, which is always fascinating to see. So.
Right. And I was trying to figure out what exactly, and I mean, they give you a little bit of what they do, and they're trying to flee violence and war. And so they are banded together. The thing with the markings, they're clearly like self-mutilating markings, even on the little girl's face. So this is something that they do as this group. And so we don't know a ton about them, but they don't seem like they are certainly not violent and they seem fairly peaceful other than the fact that they have some method of self-defense which involves more like hammers and things like that. Although we don't really get to see them actually in action, we just see them getting ready for a fight. And it is questionable that they have even survived this long if the whistling thing was their mode of alert. So that, and we never actually get to see who is threatening them in this particular scenario. We just sort of see the sort of beginning prep for like they, hear the bad whistle and then they all go and try to hide in the bushes. Not very well either.
Maybe
So
I'm misremembering, but I don't even think they have any weapons visible, right?
They have
Like,
they
their
have
hammers and they have
hammer.
bows
oh, they
and
have hammers.
quivers,
That's right. Yeah.
and they have yeah bows and arrows.
So anti-zombie weapons, basically.
Yeah. Um, So, but I do like seeing that there's like another type of group of people. And so I'm assuming this is something in the game, Stuart. Is
Oh yeah,
that
this is a whole faction that we will get to know more, presumably.
okay?
And I found this introduction of this group to be surprisingly warm and empathetic, like in a good way. Like they humanize them immediately, especially with this dad and daughter
Oh
effect,
yeah.
and then this other group of people behind them who are, a mixture of men and women, old and not young, but youngish, and the fact that they're speaking openly about trying to get away from a war, trying to flee or yeah, just basically have a chance to survive away from war. And as they hide, the daughter asks, "Is it demons?" And the dad says, "Wolves."
Hmm.
And so that is where we leave them, and we go to Ellie, who's then training with Jesse on the heavy bag, and he's kind of giving her backhanded compliments, and then tells her to write down her speech before they go to the meeting, which is the next scene. Uh, I rather enjoyed this. I have gone to a ton of public meetings. Maria apparently in her backstory, she was a DA, so she's familiar, I think, with how uh Robert's rules and things like that kind of go. They don't do it quite down the line like that, but they have a process for who can speak at these meetings. And we start with Scott, who I don't empathize with. I mean, I know he's telling like important, he's talking about important stuff like turkeys versus chickens and corn is this and that. And
I
he
love
is
Scott. Scott's the whole reason why Jackson exists, basically.
Yep.
It's because
yeah,
people who think like Scott.
in a way, yeah, but he's such a public comment speaker at a public meeting where he's not even on topic and he's just like, I don't even have an opinion about what you guys want to talk about, but I'm just going to talk about corn and turkeys for, the better part of half an hour. So yeah, that's happening, and then we get into the other speakers. I forgot to look up the next one who speaks out is this mom, and she makes a point about I lost my sister. We're not okay as a community. We shouldn't launch this posse. And like yeah, okay, you kind of expect to hear that. And I think again, that's Craig Mazin's perspective that Joel wasn't the only person who died. Lots of people died, and they all have, or most of them have other people they were close with in the community, and therefore that's going to be impacting and affecting this decision. And then Carlisle, who is an actor who's very familiar looking, and I can't remember. I didn't look up his name. Do either of you guys know who that is?
Mm-mm.
No,
Does he look familiar to you guys? He's not even in the guest appearances.
he didn't
He's
look familiar to me. No.
he's been in a ton of stuff. But okay, so in a tiny role, he might not come back, but he's just like live and let live, turn the other cheek, and that launches Seth's retort, which was consistent with what you might imagine a guy like that might say, but also in support of Ellie's mission, which I think is challenging her worldview a little bit.
Yep.
So before we go on, how would you both have voted?
I think Seth's wrong. I don't think there's any indication that these people are going to come back because they killed one guy and left two others alive quite purposefully. So This was clearly like an intended murder. And once they did their murder, they left. So I would vote no.
So I don't know because even though they left them, everybody doesn't fully understand their motivations, and now their community is known. And as we discussed last time, there's also the question about whether their community is known to, the big cordyceps entity. And so they've lost a lot of people and a lot of resources, and they're trying to rebuild. And so I do think that there is some benefit to understanding what the threat actually is and making sure that it isn't something that will be threatening in the future. But probably what that involves is potentially moving the community or figuring ways to protect themselves against that in a better way. But a lot of them make the point that the walls didn't save them, the walls didn't protect them. With all their preparation that they had done, they still got through, and look at what they're dealing with. And so I do understand the reluctance to send some of their very and you would ostensibly be sending some of your best resources in terms of people who would be able to be helpful in this situation, in terms of like defense of the community. But there's also the very real possibility that you could be starting a war that you don't need to. And this is a threat to the bigger community. So I have to say, I think I would have a hard time making the decision on both of these things. Like maybe reconnaissance versus absolute like confrontation. But maybe you do need to understand what this is a little bit more. Now we know that that's not why Ellie really wants to go, and despite her pretty words, and I think Tommy and Gail both see that. She she really does. She has been hurt horribly. She is grieving, and she does want vengeance. Um, but like for the community as a whole, if you're sitting on that council, like I think you have to think about the larger group, and I don't know that that involves actually confronting what is clearly a very well trained group of, I mean, militants or whatever you want to, a faction or whatever you want to call it. So I don't know. I think it would be yes, but with some strings, I suppose.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know. That's
interesting.
it's a hard thing. What do you think, Kyle?
I think I would have voted no. I was very persuaded by the first speaker who pointed out the damage that this community has already taken, and 16 is a huge number for these folks to send. And then um, Seth's point, it was unexpectedly compelling to me, but I think that my reaction would have been, okay, so let's fortify where we are even more. Like let's increase our patrols and send them out a little further so we have more warning. Let's do this, that, and the other thing, but not, let's send 16 people to Seattle to try and find these folks and eliminate them. So
Yeah,
I think I would have been amongst the majority as we find out who says, thanks, but no thanks.
yeah, it's basically 8-3 is the final tally. Only three people vote in favor of sending this death squad out. Rutina Wesley in the behind the scenes says that apparently she was one of the yes votes, which makes sense given the game, but is kind of surprising given Jackson as it exists in this TV show, I feel like. But apparently she got on board with it after she heard from the writers like why she might have voted yes. And then I don't think we know anybody else's vote. And that's even based on everything I've heard from interviews and stuff. No, no, none of the other yes votes are known, but apparently Maria was one. Do you guys want to talk about Ellie's speech at all, other than the fact that it's complete fabrication?
I thought that Jesse's advice to her to write things down and not speak passionately was wrong because her speech ends up being deeply unconvincing. And so
I thought the same thing.
I was like, if they were trying to show how she totally screwed up her ability to, screwed up her chance to persuade the council to move forward, then they did a good job because there was nothing about that made me think, yes, this person is,
I think
got a really good plan here.
Craig Mazin would be happy to hear you say that in a way because he talks about it on the podcast that he had a tough mission here to write an unconvincing speech.
Hmm.
And Bella
That
Ramsey had to perform it in a like a competent but unconvincing manner. Like
Yeah.
that's
And that's
tough.
exactly how I read it. So that's good. That's what they were going for.
There you go, right down the line. Okay, so then we jump to so the vote comes out, we're adjourned, everybody walks out. It's kind of like a real anticlimactic moment. Dina's, making faces at Ellie. She's surprised by the outcome, but Ellie just walks out of the room. And then we jump to Gail watching Little League and kids falling down, and her kind of weirdly enjoying that in a way. And then Tommy comes and sits next to her, and they talk about Ellie. This was anything with Catherine O'Hara is like kind of great, but this was a pretty great scene where she reveals her thoughts about about Ellie specifically. Um, and the outcome here is, I mean, she's a complicated character. She's not like very maternal, obviously. She's just kind of like, yeah, no, Ellie's a mess. Ellie's messed up. She was before she met Joel, and you can't own her bad decisions, basically, is kind of what I take away from that.
Oh, she says more than that. She's like, you can't save everybody.
Yeah,
Like
that's what
you can't redeem. You can't redeem. So it's interesting.
I was trying to figure out whether that is a perspective that you would have to adopt as a therapist in the post-apocalypse, basically, or whether that's actually the position of most therapists in the here
Mm.
and now. Maybe we should find one and ask one, but it's an interesting acknowledgement that there are some people just beyond saving that their work is futile for some folks.
Such an interesting choice of words. Some people can't be saved when that is what Joel said to her in his last session with her.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and what like the implications of saving her have like wrecked him. Interesting choice of words. We jump to Ellie is prepping her gear when comes in, and Ellie's trying to leave without her. Dina, I would think we are all like, of course she's not going to be able to leave without Dina. Dina
Yeah.
is clearly way ahead of her in a way.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed this whole interaction and how Dina's got it all plotted out. That was pretty great.
Yeah.
And it also balances out. I mean, Ellie's prepping, but the funniest thing between them is the discussion about the Chucks and how Dina's like, yeah, we're not doing that. Like, I respect your dedication, but you got to wear boots. So that was pretty good. And that she has maps. She's got everything really well planned out. Much more so than Ellie does. So there's a little bit of relief also, and actually a little bit of I think she understands that Dina loved Joel too. And so to have her partner with her in this, I think is incredibly moving and important. And she's not as sort of alone in the world as she may have thought.
Yeah. Um, it does take 13 days to walk from Jackson, Wyoming to Seattle, given Google Maps today. I assume that means better conditions than they have to deal with.
But
But
before we get to that though, the goodbye, woof.
yeah, well, that's part of what I'm getting at is Seth gives them 2 weeks worth of rations, and I was like, is that going to be enough? But yeah, it's a great scene. I'm glad that they fleshed out the Seth character a lot more. This is not treatment that he gets in the game at all. There was
Mm.
no town meeting. There was no goodbye at the gate. Um, really enjoying this though. He's like, take my better rifle. Janine in the stables is a fan or something, or like is supportive of the cause. And here's all the stuff I'm giving you. And I would come with you, but I would have been an adventurer too, but I took an arrow in the knee.
I do think that here is when my real logistical problems with the show or with this journey start to really emerge because first of all, this plan sucks. Like, can we just say this plan is terrible?
It's a
There,
video game plan.
there's dude, there are
The
two
plan for
people.
the plan to take Ellie from Boston to wherever the hell they were going in the first movie, in the first season,
It was
also.
also terrible. And
Yeah.
At least they had a
they're magical
destination
traveling.
and a group that they were looking for. They don't know they're looking for somebody named Abby in Seattle. I mean, this is just like and the two
Kyle,
people.
you're forgetting She saw the patch. She
That's true. She
saw
did see the
the
patch.
patch.
Yeah.
Yeah, they know the
I,
organization they're looking for, and in fact, by knowing that it's Abby, Manny, Nora, and Owen, they can use the collection of names to actually even dial it in further, I think.
that's true. That's true. And then they get through this journey. I mean, it is rugged terrain between Wyoming and Seattle. Like you've got tall mountains, you've got, vast plains. It's a long way and it is not developed. It is a lot of like wilderness. And you see a couple like kind of glamour shots of them like, riding their horse through like a river and stuff, but I I think that this journey would have been very, very treacherous and difficult. And I was a little disappointed that they're just kind of like, and now they're there. Like it just feels way too easy and fast to me.
That's how they did travel in this first season also, right?
That is
They
true.
they
And they
drove
came and they went a lot further.
they
Yeah.
drove from the outskirts of Massachusetts to Kansas City in one episode, etc., and then went from there to Salt Lake City or to Jackson very quickly. This is
Thinking
par for the course.
Jacksonville.
I'm glad that this isn't set in Florida for all kinds of reasons.
Agree, agree. Um,
Yeah, so I enjoyed the travel scenes. They're like pick your, I'm not entirely sure what the rules of the game was about the alphabet and the band names. Clearly, it was very subjective based on some of Dina's responses. And then there was the game about who'd you kill? And this was quite telling also because, well, I don't think actually Ellie's response is even honest. She did kill Riley first, but she says I'm not going to talk about that.
Mhm.
But then she talks about the kid in Kansas City, and she didn't kill him. She shot him in the back, and he was like dying a slow and painful death. And I'm pretty sure it was Joel who actually killed him
yeah, I think it was.
because she was freaking out and had to leave the room.
Yeah, he told her to leave the room. So,
Anyway, the
Yeah, it is interesting to see that from her point of view. I don't think I'm trying to remember. Has Dina killed anybody? Does she say in that
she doesn't get a
exchange?
chance to say if she,
Yeah.
because then she's actually looking at the changing weather because she is some sort of weather savant and
So
is like, we better,
we
yeah,
don't
we
really
don't know yet.
know her we don't really know her prowess or something like
We
that.
don't know much about her background. Like, what is her family situation? Did she leave somebody behind in Jackson when they left town just now?
Mhm.
Other than Jesse, who we do hear she's gotten back to get together with. But yeah, and oh God, I've completely lost the thread of where I was going with that. But she doesn't get a chance to talk about whether or not she's killed somebody, but we can assume based on with the nonchalance with which she asked that question that of course she has, just because that's what you do now. That's what you're forced to do.
Mhm.
Um, Campsite discussion. Uh, Dina's doing a lot of mixed messages, flirting, saying, I'm not a lesbian. I'm back together with Jesse. Rate my kiss. It wasn't a D. I wasn't that high, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely some game playing going on.
hmm
Definitely seems like, young young people discuss it's very true to how young these conversations go amongst young folks,
Young
19, 20
kids
year olds.
today.
Yeah.
well, I actually thought it was it did not feel forced.
Hmm.
It felt like something that actually would happen.
Oh yeah, the scatter shot.
It,
I wasn't thinking it felt unrealistic. I was just like, yep, that's there's some games being played, but that's pretty accurate.
yeah. And
And
then
the
they,
interesting question she asked about, does Jesse ever seem sad to you? And I hope that's just kind of how he is inside. Otherwise, it's my fault. I thought that was actually that's pretty revealing for her to say that out loud to Ellie. But then Ellie's like, I don't want to hear about Jesse, probably.
yep.
And then the next day they come across, or we don't know how far in the future. The next scene, they are on that same trail with the signpost where we saw the earlier scene with the people in brown and the scarred faces. There's a body on the trail. Actually, it's the body of the guy who was their scout or the tail end Charlie guy. A lot of different caliber bullets. Dina goes off trail and comes back puking, and then Ellie sees all the bodies in the woods. Guess they weren't quiet enough. or
No,
not well hidden enough. We don't really know much more other than, well, I guess because of the context we have from earlier, the wolves, whoever they are, must have caught up to them and killed a little girl.
I know. And her dad or her protector, whatever he was.
Everybody. Uh, Yeah, and then they basically get to Seattle with a couple of other scenes in between. There are more call outs to this action franchise that Dina and Joel and Ellie are all familiar with called Curtis and Viper because they say it's quiet, too quiet, which I was kind of annoyed at when they first did that. And then when they made it a quote from a movie, all three movies or something, I was like, okay, that's cool. And then they do it again very soon after that when Ellie's just trying to sound like a badass because she's gonna kill a lot of the wolves.
Yep.
Yeah, this is very similar to the back and forth and the dialogue from the video game. So I'm kind of happy to hear it between Dina and Ellie. They do have that sort of easy patter.
This is where I'll go on my one kind of like nitpicky geography rant, which is if you're coming through Snoqualmie Pass, which they said they were going to do, then you're approaching the city from the east.
Yeah,
And there's a big lake in the middle. It's in the way, and the bridges are probably not going to have survived. So you got to go north or south to get around the big lake, Lake Washington. Um, if you the only way that you get the skyline views that you get of the Space Needle on the left and Elliott Bay, and then you're obviously looking north. So they went south and they're approaching the city from the south, which makes sense. But then there's a sign, and the sign on the freeway says like Seattle 9, Tacoma like 40, Portland 100 and something. And to see that sign, you would have to be standing in like Linwood, Washington, maybe like north of Seattle, looking south because that's where the direction that Tacoma and Portland are. And it just is like I'm usually pretty accepting of this. If they jump between locations or something, and it's not realistic, I don't try, I try not to get too tripped up on it. But the sign was very deliberately made, either as a real practical object or, painted in CGI and post-production or something. And I just don't understand why they would have done something so obviously wrong because immediately hey, they're not facing the right direction to get the view that they're getting. So it's just a really baffling choice to me. Like, why did they intentionally put in something and like, write out all these letters and figure out the distances and stuff like that for something so incorrect? I think maybe they just thought people wouldn't know where Seattle was, so they need to know where it is in relation to Portland. I don't know. It's baffling to me. So
yeah.
I think
the
they just did it to upset you.
maybe the geography of how they approach and everything is actually fine. Like you go around the south side of the lake and then you're approaching from the south and they're kind of maybe over in West Seattle, but maybe they got lost. But the sign doesn't make any sense at all. And it's very obvious and prominent in the scene. And it's just like, why? Why did you put that there? Just make it say Seattle, Everett, Bellingham instead. It just doesn't make any sense.
I think HA's onto something. They know that they have now a history to live up to with placing a evergreen forest in the mountains 10 miles west of Boston.
So it's an in
And
joke.
so
You
and
you
so
are
now
sounding, yep, you're sounding remarkably like what I Stuart and I were sounding like for that whole thing.
uh,
Um,
so now they're just like, look, let's just put in a sign that's clearly on the wrong side of the city and only people from Seattle will get it, but then they can write in letters to their, local newspaper and we'll get more coverage that way.
It was very frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, I think back to Risky Business, way back to Risky Business, the Tom Cruise, Rebecca De Mornay picture. I think they called them pictures back then.
Picture
Uh,
shows.
moving pictures, where he drives from the suburbs of Chicago, and then next thing you know, he's on Lakeshore Drive. Like it's seconds later, and it would have taken him an hour and a half. These sorts of fun ways that movies and TV shows completely screw up geography, and it happens all the time. But I'm sorry it happened to your town too. Nobody should have to be on that list.
I'll get over it.
Um, so they look out over this beautifully rendered CGI ruined Seattle. I kind of liked it. I like the birds. I like that they lingered on the shot for a while to let you kind of take it in.
Me too.
And then we get to see Manny, who they are. If there's one place that I'm agreeing with the beef about rewriting characters, it's still this character. Manny is a beloved character to me, and I don't know why they kept the name. Like, give him the other jerk's name if they're gonna make him a jerk, because this guy is not acting like he's not written like Manny. He's written like another character, so it's just annoying.
I did find it impressive how in about 6 seconds of screen time he still manages to be incredibly unpleasant somehow. Like
Yeah,
I'm just like, why why do
he's
I hate
talking
this
to
person so
himself.
much? Yeah.
He's just talking to himself, and he's a jerk.
He hates himself too.
No, he's talking to the voice on the radio,
Oh, I know. He's
but
just annoying.
yeah,
Like
no,
he
he's
manages to be like his lovely self even in this scene, just to remind us that
yeah,
you should really dislike him.
he's
I
got it coming. And he's like, "Oh, first you wanted me to look here, now you want me to look here." And he's like, "Yeah, okay, you can go ahead." And all episode well, at least twice this episode they've been saying there can't be that many of them. They were just some like podunk Fireflies wannabe. And then we have our "Oh, you thought that, did you?" scene because here we go with an armored car, like an APC Striker type vehicle, four Humvees, and then I don't know, like dozens and dozens of soldiers with gear and weapons, like automatic weapons walking down the street. It's a good scene shot to make that point. It is a bad shot scene tactically because why would they want him to see if it's clear and then just walk down the street like they're on a parade instead of you wouldn't send an APC first. You would have infantry go first. And not all in one big tactical blob like that. It just for so to me, that's my Seattle signpost. It's it's just not well put together in
I'm
terms of
saving
tactics.
tactical blob for further use. I like that as a clump of useless people just standing too close to each other.
Yeah. Anyway, and then that's kind of where the episode ends. And so I guess as an audience, we're left thinking, oh no, even if they'd sent 16 people, they will honestly would have been in worse shape, right? Like the
Yeah,
two of them are sneaky. They could probably be sneaky. Whereas if there were 16 of them, they would probably not be able to be sneaky. So in a way, they made the best choice.
agree.
All right. Any other final thoughts?
No, but I'm curious to see what happens in Vancouver, Seattle, so that I want to hear what Kyle's commentary is next week about about the landscape. Because they do go quickly and tightly into the street where you can absolutely not tell where it is.
Yeah.
So, probably much like when for any city that people are familiar with, you know what the feel of that is, and Vancouver is Vancouver. So,
Uh, let's see. I was a little bit surprised given the state of the militia that Abby and her group were so impressed last episode with Jackson. Like, wow, it has power, it has walls, it has everything. I'm like, you guys have tanks. Like,
There
what?
was only the five of them there, so that's probably why that reaction
and
still
fuel
stands
and
up.
fuel for tanks. So,
Yeah, that's
Oh
true. But
yeah.
I was just kind of like, maybe they would be less incredulous about this considering where they've been living. Um, and I think we kind of spent, I don't know, a long time talking about the first half of this episode where there's all these emotional conversations and decisions happening, and then we kind of like yada 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 through most of the rest of the episode because it really just is about putting the chess pieces in the right place on the board, and that kind of stuff is always just kind of inherently less compelling. So now that the chess pieces are all arranged, like HA, I'm curious to see where they go next episode and through the rest of the season. But I think the back half of this episode is just kind of like riding horses through the landscape. It doesn't seem like there are a lot of zombies around. Maybe they really like to huddle like we saw last episode, but I thought this is in season one too, is that except for these encounters where there tend to be quite a few, it really just seems like you're able to kind of move around at least the American West without too much fear of zombies. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, when you think about Wyoming and the people per square mile, it is a low number, right?
Hmm.
And maybe that'll change now that they've gotten back to a population center. It was interesting also that when they were looking at those zombies through the sniper scope, in episode one, Tommy was thinking that they were um, going along a certain highway route, like that they had migratory patterns almost. So, if you can avoid those, maybe you're okay.
Yeah, maybe. I will also say one of the better depictions of the Seattle area on film, just in terms of like showing actual Seattle locations and places around Puget Sound. The
Frasier.
Ring, the Gore
Oh,
Verbinski film,
oh,
very, very accurate to Seattle. So, if you want to see a really kind of unsettling, not very pleasant depiction of Seattle, that one's got a lots of real places around here.
huh. It sure had the weather nailed. I
Hmm.
remember that movie being very gray.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other alibis? HA?
No, I that's about it. I am looking forward to seeing what happens next and really I noted the lack of zombies in this, but I also figured they probably blew a lot of their budget in the last episode on it.
Yep.
So I guess we will maybe see more. And it's also Seattle seems like a very just in terms of the climate and um it seems like a climate that would encourage more propagation of
Hmm.
fungi. So I'm curious to see if that makes any changes in what we've been seeing or if there's going to be a bigger splash once we get into the weeds of the show, so to speak.
Yeah, I too am interested in the future of the Splash. We'll see how that goes. The next episode is going to be entitled Day One, directed by Kate Herron. And I can't wait to find out where they're going with this. There's four more episodes left in the season, and let us reconvene again next time to talk about it. And if anybody wants to share their thoughts, please do. Email us at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com, and you can find the rest of our episodes online at reanimated.podbean.com. And thank you for listening.
Yes, indeed. Till next time. Ciao.
Adios.